In this video, I'm going to feature a book called Paul and the Power of Grace by John Barclay. It just came out last month and it's the popular version of what has been considered by many to be one of the most influential theological works in the last 50 years. I'm talking about Paul and the Gift. I'll talk about why I highly encourage you to read this book if you are a pastor or cross-cultural worker or a Bible nerd like me. But first I have a confession to make. This is my bookshelf. These are the physical books that I've brought with me to West Africa. I realized early on in my 20s that my dream of having walls of books is totally not feasible for those of us who travel and move so often. Because books are heavy. Thank goodness for the invention of e-readers. But unfortunately, I tend to buy more books at a rate faster than I can read them, especially when books on your wish list go on sale. But last summer, I decided to do something different. Over the past few years, I've been listening to a podcast called OnScript, where scholarly Bible nerds interview other Bible nerds to talk about theology and the Bible. I started listening to OnScript because during the years that we lived in West Africa, I felt out of touch in what was happening in the scholarly world since graduating from Regent College in 2010. Listening to OnScript was a way to at least hear some of the current work being done in the study of theology, Bible, and the Jesus whom we love. I still enjoy listening to OnScript because not only does it expose me to thinking that's beyond the echo chamber of my theology or tradition, it's also allowed me to grow in my appreciation for the scholarly work being done among my Catholic or Orthodox or Judaic sisters and brothers. Now, I won't pretend to understand everything that they talk about on the podcast, but I like to be challenged in my thinking once in a while. Anyway, there's a segment in each podcast called The Speed Round where they ask quick-fire questions that the interviewees are just supposed to answer within 15 seconds. In many of them, the host asks,
"What is the most important book published in biblical studies in the last 50 years?
Paul and the Gift.
John Barclay's Paul and the Gift.
Paul and the Gift.
It's John Barclay, Paul and the Gift, even though it's very recent.
So naturally, it went on my Amazon wish list. Then last summer, I decided, forget waiting for this book to go on sale, where I usually buy books when they get to the $1.99 or $9.99 range. This book was $40 US on Kindle. But then I realized that most scholarly work is regularly priced between $55 to over $100. But as per usual, Paul and the Gift stayed in my Kindle bookshelf for almost a year until this summer. One of the few blessings of this year of the COVID is time to read more. So I decided to give this a read. After the first chapter, I immediately recognized how important this book was going to be from a cross-cultural, anthropological, and missiological standpoint. And I'll get back to this later. Then after the second chapter, I then understood why these various scholars who were being interviewed on OnScript were saying that this was for them the most significant work in theology in the last 50 years. Now here's another confession. A few months in, I'm still only halfway in reading this 656-page tome for Paul and the Gift. That's why I was so excited to hear that Paul and the Power of Grace was coming out. It's meant to be a more accessible version for people like us who are not necessarily current with academia, but who are still wanting to be faithful representatives of King Jesus in our various contexts. And it's only 200 pages long. And here's why this book is important. It talks about grace. It talks about grace and how grace is ubiquitous in our Christian language. But when we talk about grace, we either mean or understand it in ways different from others, or even from what the Apostle Paul meant the term to be. What John Barclay does in Paul and the Gift is to give us a taxonomy, a lens with which to read, understand, and talk about the concept. And Barclay gives us what he calls the 6 perfections of grace. He says that when we talk about something like grace, we tend to take it to its extreme, to its perfection, to be able to give it a definition for understanding and communication. In other words, to define its essence in some pure or ultimate form. These are his 6 categories for how the term grace or gift is perfected, brought to you by a dance from Instagram Reels or TikTok. Now the 6 categories, for my own sake, I've used a mnemonic called SPINES, S-P-I-N-E-S. The first S is to represent superabundance, and I understand this to mean the extreme generosity and never-ending supply of the gift. This perfection is all about the gift itself. This would be if you were to give a gift for a friend's birthday. But you didn't just buy or make a gift, you also hosted a birthday party. And you invited all of his 300 Facebook friends to an all-you-can-eat and drink banquet hall for a week-long fiesta. It's extravagant and lavish. P. Priority. This refers to a gift being given before the recipient's response or initiative. This perfection refers to the giver rather than the gift or the recipient. This would be like giving a gift to a newborn. They won't know about the gift or who gave it or what the gift means until much later. I. Incongruity. This is the giving of the gift regardless of the worth of the recipient. This perfection is all about the recipient. This would be like giving a good gift to a sworn enemy or someone who totally does not deserve it. N. Non-circularity. I take this to mean something like no strings attached. If I give a gift, I don't expect anything in return. This is typically what we mean by how God's grace is unconditional. His love is unconditional. King Jesus' sacrifice on the cross was unconditional. E. Efficacy. This talks about whether or not the gift achieves what it was designed to do. This would be like when Jean Valjean steals from a bishop in Les Miserables, but the bishop doesn't prosecute him. Instead, he tells the police that he had given the silverware as a gift to Jean Valjean. As a result of the encounter, with the bishop telling him that he had bought his soul to turn it away from evil and to give it to God, Jean Valjean strives to become a better man in the novel. And the final S, singularity. This refers to the giver's attitude of benevolence, solely and purely. To me, this means that the giver has no ulterior motive or purpose other than to give. This could be what we might mean when we say altruistic or giving with no strings attached. Now, why do I consider this to be valuable in the context of cross-cultural mission? Typically, when I've heard people talk about grace, they define it as getting a free gift that we don't deserve, which is correct, but it tends to be implied as a no-strings-attached gift and there's no expectation of reciprocation or circulation. Pure altruism and generosity, we would say, is selfless and expects nothing in return. However, that's not the norm in other parts of the world. For example, I learned the hard way that gift giving is a high value in West African countries because it's a way to develop and continue friendships and relationships. We often joke that sometimes we get a call, and the call is exactly 1 minute long because that's the cheapest unit for making calls to people in those places. Now, making this circulated gift giving, it's the glue to their social network. It's a way to communicate that we're in right relationship with each other, and it's to signal that we have each other's backs when the time comes when we really need help. That's partly why I'm impressed by the first chapter of Paul and the Gift, because Dr. John Barclay goes into anthropological studies to say that throughout history and in most cultures, gift giving and showing grace is synonymous with reciprocation. Barclay then traces some factors that may have led to our Western understanding of grace as a no strings attached or purely unconditional gift. Barclay then uses his rubric of the 6 perfections of grace and interacts with many of the great theological minds like Augustine or Luther, Calvin, Barth, and Sanders, as well as some Second Temple literature and many of the Apostle Paul's contemporaries. A large portion of the book delves into Romans and Galatians to analyze how Paul uses the term grace in those letters. Now, without spoiling anything, since it's in the description of the book, Barclay's approach shows us clearly how Paul's understanding of God's free gift in King Jesus was socially radical. It was unlike anything they've ever seen before, and it's unconditioned, even if it's not unconditional. Now, I'll say that again. God's free gift in King Jesus was unconditioned, but not unconditional. There's so much to reflect and recalibrate in our teaching, preaching, and proclaiming the good news to a hurting world in need of a good and generous king. For me, if there's one behavioral change I need to make, it's this. I need to stop using the word unconditional when I talk about God's love or grace, when I actually mean unconditioned. God's love and God's grace is unconditioned because there's nothing that we've ever done or can do to merit His love and grace, His forgiveness and acceptance, His restoration of our honor and status. The gift in King Jesus is way before even I knew about God. The gift in King Jesus is even more abundant and extravagant than I can ever imagine. This gift in King Jesus is so effective that I don't have to be anxious about quote-unquote assurance of salvation, and I don't have to live in shame or in fear. But this gift in King Jesus is not unconditional. It requires trust in the King and obedience in what He's called us to do and to be. It means doing what He's doing, bringing about peace, justice, and right relatedness in this world. It means being who He's like, generous, compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in loyal love and faithfulness. This good gift is meant to be circulated, passed on in word and deed, so that others might experience the joy of this gift. So in conclusion, with this book by Dr. John Barclay, Paul and the Power of Grace, I encourage you to buy it, read it, give it as a gift, buy it for your pastor, buy it for your cross-cultural worker. I've put the link below for details. So until next time, Charis Kairene, my friends.